All right. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on two of the most secret, most powerful organizations in the U.S. government. We're going to be talking about elite operators, missions where the stakes couldn't be higher, and the seriously blurred lines of modern war. Let's get right into it.
So here's the big question, right? When a mission needs to be completely off the books, totally deniable, or when a high-value target has to be taken out with absolute precision, who gets that call? Well, the answer usually boils down to two groups: the CIA's Special Activities Center, also known as SAC, and the military's Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC. Now, on the surface, they might seem pretty similar, but the rules they play by, their entire reason for being, they exist in two completely different universes.
And that really brings us to our first big idea. To get a handle on these organizations, you first have to understand the fundamental difference between being a spy and being a soldier.
Okay, this really gets to the core DNA of each group. It all starts with the legal code they operate under. The CIA's SAC, they're under Title 50. That's the rulebook for intelligence activities. JSOC, on the other hand, lives under Title 10, which governs the armed forces. Now, this isn't just some legal paperwork. This dictates everything. It's why a CIA operative is under unofficial cover, while a JSOC operator is a uniformed soldier. And it defines their main job: covert action for the CIA and direct action for JSOC.
So what exactly is covert action? Well, this is the CIA's world. Think of missions designed to change what's happening on the ground, politically or militarily, without ever leaving an official American fingerprint. The whole point is plausible deniability, which is a fancy way of saying the US government can credibly say, hey, that wasn't us. It is all about shaping events from the deepest shadows.
And then you have this. This is JSOC's specialty, and the contrast is just brilliant. With direct action, there's no denying who's behind it. These are quick, hard-hitting, unmistakable military operations. We're talking about the military's absolute best, like Delta Force, or the Navy's DEVGRU. You might know them as SEAL Team 6. Their job isn't to subtly influence things. It's to go in, seize, destroy, or capture a target. Period. It's a hammer, not a whisper.
So let's keep building on this, because that legal distinction we talked about, it creates totally different rules of engagement and incredibly different personal risks for the operators on the ground. Now this might just be the most critical difference of them all. A JSOC operator is what's called a lawful combatant. What that means is, if they're captured, they're a prisoner of war, they get protections under the Geneva Conventions. A CIA SAC officer, though, is considered an unlawful combatant. If they're captured, there are no formal protections. They're not a soldier, they're a spy, and they are completely, totally on their own. The personal stakes just couldn't be any higher.
So after hearing all that, different laws, different missions, life or death differences and risk, you'd think they operate in totally separate orbits, right? One group sticks to the shadows, the other to the battlefield. Well, the reality is way more complicated and honestly, a lot more interesting than that.
The truth is, in the modern age of conflict, these two worlds don't just brush up against each other. They smash together and merge in ways that are really powerful and sometimes pretty controversial.
And this is how it actually works. It's this fascinating symbiotic cycle. The CIA brings the intelligence, the spies on the ground, the local networks, the who and the where. JSOC brings the overwhelming force, the elite assault teams, the how. They then combine these skills into joint task forces, sometimes known as Omega teams, that blend the CIA's deniable authority with JSOC's raw power. And that connection runs deep. Look at that last step. The CIA often recruits its best paramilitary officers directly from the ranks of seasoned JSOC operators. They know exactly who to look for.
And look, this fusion creates one of the most lethal and effective tools of national power the world has ever seen. It really is. But as we're about to find out, this powerful combination comes at a cost. Because when you mix the CIA's culture of secrecy with JSOC's lethality, you step into a world where oversight gets really, really difficult, and accountability can easily become a casualty of the mission itself.
Over the years, these operations have stirred up some really serious controversy. We're talking about persistent reports of civilian casualties, missions based on intelligence that turned out to be tragically wrong, and what critics both inside and outside the government have called a culture that puts the mission above everything else. And that includes accountability.
Just take a look at this number: 50%. This comes from former analysts talking about the peak of the war in Afghanistan. They estimated that the error rate for identifying the right target for a night raid could be as high as 50%. That means 1 out of every 2 raids could have hit the wrong house, the wrong family. That's not a statistic, that's a profound tragedy, happening over and over again. And this really gets to the core of the accountability problem. When things do go wrong, investigations from journalists and human rights groups have often found that the official military story doesn't quite match up with what happened on the ground. Allegations get dismissed, investigations fall short, and the real human cost is often buried in official reports.
And here it is, the central dilemma. The extreme secrecy that makes these units so incredibly effective at hunting their targets is the exact same secrecy that shields them from public and sometimes even congressional scrutiny. It's a classic paradox, right? How do you hold your most secret warriors accountable without blowing their cover and compromising their ability to do their job?
One of the heaviest accusations against these operations is that they can blur the line between a legal combat operation and an assassination, raising the question of whether they sometimes amount to what critics call summary executions. This really challenges the idea of due process, especially when these missions happen in countries where the U.S. isn't even officially at war.
And the level of force we're talking about can be just immense. This detail from investigative reporting is particularly chilling. The documented use of highly lethal grenades specifically designed to kill every single person inside a room. When that's the kind of tool you're using, there is absolutely zero margin for error.
All of this, it funnels down to one final, very difficult question about power, about secrecy, and about what it means to be a democracy in the 21st century.
When a country creates warriors this powerful and sends them to operate this deep in the shadows, who is watching the watchers? You know, there's no easy answer. It's the fundamental tension between our need for security and our belief in transparency. And it sits right at the heart of the story of the CIA and JSOC. It's a question every democracy has to keep asking itself. Thanks for joining me for this one.